Professionalism Day 2025. Of course, this program is being recorded. We do have a YouTube page, the Passaic County Bar. Drop by, just message me or Karen for the link. We send it out periodically. We have a really good presentation for this year's Professionalism Day. But before we get to that, I just want to let you know, I believe it's December 2nd. December 2nd, we're having another program where you can get, at a minimum, ethics credits. I don't know if there's DIE credits, but I have to take a second look at that. And Candace Drisgula, Jeff Fiorello are going to be doing a program on alternative dispute resolution. And we're beginning to shape that program. And we're going to do it the same way we do all these programs recently, as a lunchtime program presented by teleconference on Zoom. Okay, so mark your calendars, order in that day, and we'll have a cool program on ADR and what the latest is on those programs, specifically in Passaic County Family Court, of course. But today we have a speaker who reached out to us, and he has a fascinating biography. I'll tell you a little bit about him and a little bit about the program. His name is Jonathan Z. Cohen. He's a lawyer. Well, that's a good start, right? He's a speaker, podcaster, ultra-endurance athlete, and philanthropist. His background includes 5 years of public service in 2 different countries. He also worked in the Bronx Special Victims Division as a prosecutor. So that's something near and dear to my heart, having supervised the Passaic County Special Victims Unit for many years right here in Passaic County. He also was an infantry combat soldier with the IDF. And one of the things we'll be talking about is managing stress and overcoming setbacks. So I suspect someone who's had that tenure with the IDF certainly knows a little bit about that, right? Jonathan educates, he inspires, and shares actionable insights to help thousands of ambitious professionals lead a purpose-driven life through his stories, his frameworks, and his systems. A little bit about what you're about to experience. The course is designed to equip us professionals with the tools and techniques to cultivate resilience as a defining character attribute by empowering effective stress management to navigate, personal and professional challenges. So through these frameworks, we're going to try to learn to overcome obstacles that might impact our growth and develop a certain kind of mindset while learning how to deliver in high pressure situations. So his background certainly speaks to high pressure situations. Obviously ultra endurance athlete and a combat soldier, and all the other things that he's done throughout his career, and also being a lawyer in the Special Victims Unit. So he's been in a variety of high stress environments throughout his career, and I look forward to listening to this. And without anything further, Jonathan, why don't you take over, sir?
Joseph, thank you so much. Truly humbled by the introduction and the feedback. I mean, I read your bio, and truly it's a pleasure to meet you and have this conversation. I know you have a lot going on in the background, so I'm gonna let you get to it. I'll get to it. And welcome, everyone. This is The Art of Overcoming Setbacks. My name is Jonathan Cohen. I'm gonna share a bit about who I am, where I'm from, but that's all in an effort to create context. None of this is self-indulging. None of this is intended to persuade. I am selling you nothing except how to lead a higher quality of life. I geek out on these things, how to be a better version of myself. Because once upon a time, I didn't know how to do that. And, everyone in my life suffered because of it. And putting myself in really difficult situations has helped me figure out how to be a bigger, better version of me. Now, the main thing that I want to just preface all of this with is that none of this is clinical. I've sat down with hundreds of professionals, but I do not claim any medical expertise or anything along those lines. This is all intended to be self-reflecting tools and exercises that you can leverage. And even if you don't personally struggle with these things, maybe you know somebody who does. And part of guiding this conversation, particularly within the legal profession, is that a lot of us struggle with stress management. And the big caveat with all that is, it's stress management. It's not stress elimination. So we think that by eliminating our problems, that means that once we get to that next step, all of a sudden, the stress will no longer be there. But inevitably, there's another problem on the horizon. And so we just kind of beat ourselves up and down into the ground, telling ourselves we just have to make it through when Suffering and resilience and happiness, all of these different things, they're skills, they're attributes, they're practices that can be cultivated and trained. No one is born with these particular skills. They acquire them. And so today I want to offer you tips, tools, tactics, strategies, techniques, ideas for you to wrestle with, for you to challenge, for you to play with, for you to think about, and walk away with one actionable thing. Walk away with just one thing that you're
Very
going to
nice.
implement into your life. Because the reality is, all of us
Move on.
can
So
have the information. If
different.
none of us act on it, it's not going to do anything. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint in a second. But I really just wanted to take a second to introduce myself, get a feel for what's going to go on over the next, I guess, 90 minutes that we have together at this point. And we could talk about how maybe you want to be a bigger, better, better version of yourself. It's never too late, it's never too early. There's always an opportunity. And so I find that having a growth mindset, a learning mindset, albeit I am 35 years old, I imagine there are way more seasoned attorneys than me. And, why should you listen to someone like me? I mean, that's for you to decide. I'm here to share what I have learned over the course of my career. I'm here to share what I believe can make a pivotal impact in this particular industry because lawyers are suffering and the data shows it. The conversation needs to change around it. And so part of what I want to offer you are these ideas for you to consider in hopes that maybe if you do know someone dealing with these particular struggles, you can offer some tools, tactics, and strategies for them to leverage. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'll take any questions as we go through this thing. If I see them in the chat or otherwise, or if you want to hop right on and interrupt me. We'll take it as we go. Can everyone see my presentation? Unless someone says otherwise, I'm guessing that you can. Okay, so this is the art of overcoming setbacks. As you know, this presentation is being recorded, and if you don't want your image or voice to be included in any future replays, as I know this will be distributed on YouTube by the Passaic County Bar Association, you can turn off your camera and mic during the presentation. We already went through a brief overview of my career, but what I'm currently doing is I'm the Associate General Counsel and Business Development Leader for a company called PMY Technologies, a 20 plus year partner of another company that I'm sure you've heard of called NVIDIA. Why that is uniquely important is because I have this front row seat to the AI era and industry, how things have worked over the last few years, in particular around artificial intelligence and how it plays into mental fitness, mental strength, stress management, particularly for lawyers. I'm going to touch on gently just because I believe it's a pivotal part of the conversation and that the most important skill anyone can develop in 2025 going into 2026 is emotional intelligence. And so working with NVIDIA and particularly at PMY, we've been in business for over 40 years, do over $1 billion in revenue. And this front row seat that I've had over the last few years, going from working SVU in Bronx County, arguably and respectfully, an extremely antiquated technological system that allow the slow wheels of justice to turn, to working with the number one technological innovator in the entire world with the largest market cap in history, has been a wild roller coaster of a ride, from seeing robot dogs being displayed on stage to attending NVIDIA's GTC notable conference to seeing those same robot dogs like walking in the street. And so there's a lot of conversations around what the future holds, and I am offering these ideas in a way to be prepared because what's unique about AI in this particular part of this inflection point that we're going through as a society is that in past we'll call them revolutions or otherwise, shifts in the landscape, is that there was some sense of a transition where we knew what types of jobs could be upheld. If, for example, we went from manning crops in the field to the tractor trailer, like there would be someone who would drive the tractor. So there was some type of replacement sense as we enhance technology over time. Now with AI, there's a little bit more confusion. And so how we can prepare is to hone our emotions to guide that conversation, to make sure that we have that self-reliance, self-sufficiency. And so these tools are intended to guide that conversation. My endurance background, marathons, ultra marathons, I don't really believe that all of that is entirely relevant, but I'll touch on it briefly because the idea is that you practice these ideas moments where doubt set in, moments where training reveals itself or preparation shows to remove imposter syndrome and other forms of self-sabotage that can set in. Endurance is a fantastic way that I have practiced these ideas in the field. I've done things from run marathons to ultra marathons in as slow as 5 hours, as long as 10 hours, 50 plus miles, as fast as 3 hours. And all of these different runs and strength endurance have helped me raise tens of thousands of dollars for different organizations across the board, from Feeding America to Curing Alzheimer's to research. And we'll talk about purpose through service as a way to cultivate a sense of self and to help cultivate and guide a passion and also help build awareness around that purpose and passion to help manage stress. My background in public service also, we touched on that. I don't want to belabor it, but the last part that I'll touch on is that being a podcaster, I've had this unique lens into the minds of hundreds of professionals, ranging from female F-16 fighter pilots, A-10 pilots, uh, to Navy SEALs, to global best-selling authors like Stephen Pressfield and Dr. Edith Eger, who have sold millions of copies of their books, state Supreme Court justices, blind from birth, going on to run multiple Ironmans, you name it, professional athletes, 7, 8, 9 figure entrepreneurs, you name it. I've had the opportunity to sit down with someone in that space in one way or another. And the reason that I do is to help guide the conversation around how to manage thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And so if you don't trust me, you could trust them. And so that's a lot of the guidance. Even though I've read hundreds of books on these topics, papers, analysis, surveys, and such, the reason that I'm sharing this is because I want to practice these ideas and share these ideas because people struggle with these ideas. And I think part of that bleeds into the next thing that I want to talk about, which are the key objectives. Now, initially, I believed I was going to speak with everyone for about 50 minutes. And for me, remembering three simple things for you to walk away with, the key objectives of today, so I don't inundate you with information because I'm going to throw a lot at you. And again, this is intended to be questioned. I love to be challenged and I want to measure up to it. So if there's something you're confused about, concerned about, or want to know more about, if I don't know the answer, I will get back to you because that's what we know how to do as lawyers. We know how to problem solve. We know how to define. We know how to research. And so having that humility has allowed me to lean into these ideas of how to define resilience, how to reframe stress management, and how to cultivate a growth mindset. So at the core of overcoming setbacks are these three ideas. When we look at resilience and redefining it, in my world, what I've come to learn it as, when we reframe stress management, right, instead of stress elimination, when we talk about cultivating a growth mindset, what do these things mean? They're abstract ideas, like you can't really touch them. So it's difficult to kind of pinpoint the role that they could play in our life because you could tell me something, but ultimately it's on me to implement it. So I don't want to close the conversation. I want to open the conversation for lawyers in specific on these topics because for better or worse, we do struggle as an industry with these things. Part of that is due to the personality traits of lawyers. If you look at Lawyer Brain, I believe Richard Feynman is the individual's name who runs it. He does different personality trait assessments. And he found that lawyers in particular struggle with resilience largely because of two attributes when it comes to the skeptical nature of who we are, and that we have a uh, lack of trust within that skepticism, meaning we like to question things. And so when we question things, it lowers our optimism for what can potentially happen. And so resilience is something that can be cultivated by learning how to cultivate a sense of optimism and how to reframe certain things, how to consider another perspective. And that leans into a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, where even if we are someone who can argue that we do have a growth mindset, it's still possible to maintain a fixed mindset in other areas of our life. And so having a growth mindset is about seeing the opportunity. It's about seeing the bright side of things. And so I'm going to go through these key objectives as we go through this presentation here today. If you have any questions, again, please don't hesitate to ask. So let's talk on some of the trends that are going on in the legal industry and why this conversation needs to open up for lawyers. Well, 41% when it comes to the stigma around mental well-being don't of lawyers don't talk about how their mental well-being is impacted with their employer. Why? Because that stigma, they're afraid that they're going to be treated differently. And even though everyone says they take it seriously, only 16% of institutions offer any kind of training around stress management, mental health, and the trends reflect it. Because even if the institutions are offering the training, let's say 100% are, it's incumbent upon individuals such as yourselves that are attending a training like this to make sure that they're showing up because 90+% of signups for a class like this or for a CLE like this or for a seminar like this don't attend. They just sign up. They don't follow through, which erodes the confidence and that erodes their self-image, which in turn leads to forms of self-sabotage. So the point of what I'm saying is people struggle. 68% of attorneys struggle with work-life balance. Anxiety is cases have risen within the last 2, 3 years uh, since COVID, and depression cases as well within the legal profession. And so when we look at the even bigger numbers around how many lawyers, and this is all according to a well-being report put out by the American Bar Association, New Jersey State Bar Association, and the International Bar Association. It's a compilation of data. A lot of this is based on survey analysis. And so what's important about this is that when we hear 70+% of attorneys experience imposter syndrome, if I was to survey how many of us feel that way on this call right now, I don't imagine 7 out of 10 people would raise their hand. But that is part of the imposter syndrome aspect. We can define imposter syndrome if you don't know what it is. It is that sense of not belonging in the place that you're in, an undeservingness, if you will, despite having a competence in your ability to perform. And so the other aspect of that is when we tell ourselves the wrong story, we end up burning out. And what do I mean by that? Well, burnout is actually composed of three elements, but most people only understand burnout as exhaustion. And so when you only understand burnout as exhaustion and you start telling yourself the wrong story, then you're going to solve for the wrong problem. And so understanding burnout is extremely important because with burnout, you need some form of cynicism to be tethered to it is one element, some sense of detachment and exhaustion. So without those three, you're not burned out. And so when we talk about cynicism, I'm talking about like, and detachment, I'm talking about like none of this matters. The lack of optimism and what could potentially transpire as a result of engaging in some sense of work or in any type of social interaction or otherwise and compound that with the exhaustion. Without those three elements, you're not actually burned out. So if you're telling yourself you're burned out, then you're going to start to take actions in accordance with that belief. And that can erode everything that you're trying to accomplish because you're telling yourself the wrong story. And so, how can you start to tell yourself a different story? How do you start to take control of the narrative? Well, it starts with recognizing where we're at as a legal industry and the impact of the stigma, why a lack of training and being aware of it is important. And then the key health trends, mental health trends that are going on within the industry, why that matters. And these statistics are key because it shows that within our profession, there's a need. There's a need for opening up the aperture around well-being. And what is well-being? Well-being is a continuous process in which lawyers strive for thriving in each dimension of their life. A lot of us tend to over-index on one dimension of who we are, our jobs. our occupational identity. And so if something goes wrong at work, we start to tell ourselves a story that we don't have any worth, or our self-worth is diluted as a result. And so what about all the other elements of who we are, the emotional, the spiritual, the intellectual, physical, and social? How are we cultivating our well-being within those respective buckets? How are we connecting with people? How are we taking care of ourselves physically? How are we being intellectually curious? What about our faith? What about our emotional sensitivity? How do we harness the ability to guide the conversation internally for ourselves, as in our self-talk, how we educate ourselves, how we educate others on these topics, and the environment in which we do these things? And so understanding well-being is a holistic approach, that you are more than just your job. And it is, in fact, your obligation to take care of yourself across all these different buckets, not limiting it to just your physicality, not limiting it to just your social life, not only getting lost in books and research, not only putting all of your faith in one area of your life, but learning how to cultivate the different areas of your life instead of over-indexing on one or two. Because when you are well-rounded across all the different buckets, you can guide that conversation productively. And so well-being comes down to this ability to take this holistic approach, become aware of all of the different elements of your life to balance. And I know someone may be thinking, you're giving me more work to do. I don't have enough on my plate. Well, the idea is that this can be uh, productive in the sense that once you harness the awareness around the areas that you need to improve, you could take action. And no one's telling you that you need to take perfect action. You can take imperfect action. And the imperfect action starts with becoming aware, just understanding, hey, there's other areas for me to work on. And even if you're good on five of them, well, maybe the sixth you want to focus on. So the idea is that, pardon me, one, two, three, four, five, six. That's right. The six is maybe one that you want to focus on. Maybe I need to connect to more people because I isolate myself from work. Maybe I need to work on my health because I'm too focused on my work. Maybe I'm spending too much time in books and I need to start getting a bit more spiritual. Maybe I don't want to get spiritual and I want to cultivate my emotional well-being. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to offer you what's called the stress management ecosystem as an idea for you to consider as well, that goes along with this theme of a holistic approach to well-being. So most of us look for one-dimensional solutions to multi-dimensional problems. And so instead of just thinking that there's one way to do things, we know as problem solvers and attorneys that there's multiple ways to do things. And so if we become aware of this holistic posture that we can take, then the conversation starts to shift. And so that's the conversation that I want to have. So why does all this matter when it comes to the ethical side of things? Well, the applicable model rules of professional conduct talk about competence and diligence. If we are not competent, then we can't serve. And if we're not able to serve, then we're not meeting our duty as lawyers. And so if we are in a space of not being able to be competent because we're in our feelings, or we're not able to manage our emotions effectively, or we can't compartmentalize and therefore not competent, and it impacts our service, then we're not doing our clients, we're not doing our colleagues, we're not doing our employers right by the impression that we gave them. And we're not living up to the model rules because we're leaving opportunity on the table. And so, how do we do that? How do we live up to the competence? It goes more and goes beyond the substantive knowledge that you have within your given field of expertise. If something's going on at home or something's going on in another area of your life and you're not able to live up to the challenge, then you need to start to cultivate certain skills within your arsenal that allow you to be competent and serve at the highest level, as you committed to when you were admitted to the bar. And so the diligence that's required, the competence that's required, these tools that I'm going to offer you help cultivate the skill set to help you manage that competence effectively so you could serve at the top capacity of your given field of expertise. So I want to go over a few policy recommendations within the industry. I know there's a ton of high performers within this conversation. all of us as attorneys are inherently high performers. And so the policy recommendations are important just to touch on because maybe you do know about these things, maybe you don't know about these things. You don't have to integrate all of these things. But again, this is intended to be introductory to intermediate level in terms of uh, the conversation and opening up the aperture around well-being. So the first thing to focus on is to normalize mental health discussions, meaning asking people how they're doing isn't enough. Starting to ask better questions like, hey, what are you excited about this week? Like, what are you truly excited about? Not just going through the motions, but also when it comes to mental health discussions, creating space for people just to listen, be a sounding board. You don't have to offer advice. It's simply just opening up the conversation to make sure that this is something that can be normalized. Obviously, it's a spectrum. And so I would say use your discretion when you believe HR needs to get involved and the like. Um, but having the conversation around mental health can be extremely delicate. So it comes down to the stigma of the workplace and the culture of the legal industry. We tend to associate rest with weakness. Now, I could personally tell you I have physically and mentally overtrained and burned myself out without realizing it to the point that my body was talking and it kept me out of my love for endurance sports because I wanted to grit my way through things. And I viewed rest as weakness. But the reality is rest is actually restoration. And so changing that conversation to help guide and help people realize that rest, not to the point of not performing, can actually be beneficial, will actually increase productivity. And so changing that stigma means you have to encourage the use of certain resources. It means you have to encourage the use, and it means you have to encourage uh, the individuals that you work with to seek some form of rest. Rest doesn't mean just sitting on the couch watching TV. That's not what I'm talking about. Rest can be going for a walk distraction free. It means that you're not going to let your phone or social media or the pings and dings in your life dictate your response. It's about the world happening to you versus you happening to the world. And the best way to go about that is to cultivate a sense of self that allows you to get in tune with your internal dialogue around what you actually think, feel, and want. And so part of this conversation for addressing the workplace and culture stigma is recognizing that once we start to treat rest as a form of restoration, like actually, whether it's a digital free walk or a conversation with someone that you love or reaching out to people of wisdom, we'll talk about that stress management ecosystem. That's where the stigma starts to shift. And so you do this by bringing in more speakers on attorney well-being, having more continuing legal education sessions around this, whether it's around burnout or wellness or stress management. You can integrate wellness initiative at the law school level. Universities like Stanford are doing this very well right now. They offer a holistic approach across the board, but again, it's a two-way street. It's not just the offering, it's the encouraging of the use of those resources and actually keeping people accountable to those resources. I even heard certain firms go as far as offering billable hour credit because attorneys are taking advantage of mental health resources. And so a big part of all of this is the foundation. You're only as strong as a foundation. And so, what is the foundation of well-being? Well, we know the different buckets, but when it comes down to the foundational well-being tools, I'm talking about mindfulness, meaning a conscious awareness around the present moment, meaning you're not focused on what was, you're not focused on what could be, you're only focused on what is. You are where your feet are. Be where your feet are. Why is any conversation so amazing? Is it because you're looking at your phone or is it because you're fully engaged? Why, when are those moments that the time like flies, right? Like you're just super engaged in what you're doing because you're not paying attention to the clock. That's mindfulness. Becoming mindful, being mindful as often as you potentially can. And to create novel experiences within your life to help slow time down. Exercise, I can imagine you know how I feel about this, but this can range from any type of movement that you want. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Nutrition, making sure that you're treating what you're eating as information, if you will, biological information that your body is interpreting every single time you consume it. And it can be medicine. I'm not here to start preaching about food, the only and healthy habits. The idea is that you're just giving yourself a better probability and a higher probability of waking up less stressed, allowing your body to actively recover, and putting yourself in a better position at whole. But it's not supposed to be boring, it's supposed to be engaging. So, nutrition is definitely a great way to cultivate well-being. Sleep, building the ideal sleep environment, it's like the number one thing in wellness, I would say these days. Sleep is the number one restorative tool that humans on an objective basis can actually use. So, what are a few different sleep tools and sleep hygiene things that you can do? This ranges from putting a plant in your room to sleeping with blackout curtains, sleeping in a cold environment around 68 to 69 degrees, making sure you're reading a fiction book, I hear is a good thing right before. All those little habits, they won't necessarily cure any sleep insomnia that you may have, but it'll put you in a better position to get higher quality sleep so you can actively recover more effectively and show up more effectively. And then lastly, the information diet, meaning the inputs that you have in your life. As in, it's the news, it's the people, it's the content that you're consuming from books, podcasts, and otherwise, that in social media that are guiding that internal conversation, right? How many of us wake up and the first thing we do is look at our phones? Well, I would offer you, instead of looking at your phone for the first 15, 30 minutes in the day, don't. Get intentional and decide what you want out of the world. Today, I intend to show up on time to every single engagement that I have. Today, I intend to be of service to someone in my life. Whatever it is that you want out of the day, intent as we define it in the law is a conscious objective. Whatever you consciously decide that you want to do, you follow through on, and that in turn builds confidence. But making sure that the information diet is in all the inputs in your life are positive, that will impact your well-being immensely. It's about who you're hanging out with, it's about what you're reading, it's about what you're listening to, it's about what you're watching, and those are things within your control for the most part. So making sure that the algorithm isn't hijacking your dopamine to the point that you're desensitized to things that are going on, and having enough awareness to understand like this is the time I need to put the phone down and go and do something else. The information diet is a real thing, and so I'd offer it to you as a foundational tool of well-being. And all of this points to the topic of mental fitness. Mental fitness is the ability to manage your thoughts, feelings, emotions, and behaviors that support your long-term well-being, optimize high performance, help you with your decision making, especially when you're under pressure. This topic is so important to understand because not a lot of people understand what mental fitness is. Mental strength, mental fitness, mental toughness. They're all intertwined. I'd argue they're all synonymous, but I'm offering them to you in the sense that whatever resonates and lands most, run with that. And the reason I say that is because what we don't realize about mental fitness or fitness in general is that it's about an ability to recover quickly. How fast can you bring yourself back to center after a setback, a challenge, an obstacle, or any form of adversity? It's speed to recovery. It's literally this. It's how fast can you get back on rhythm to be who you are intrinsically, where you're operating, where your values are aligned, where you're operating with that frequency of like, this is where I'm supposed to be, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and this is the level that I know that I can do it at. Where am I leaving opportunity on the table? And so, how can you live your life in a way that allows you to do that more often than not? And mental fitness is that X factor that can help you recover quickly once you understand what it is and you realize that you actually have a choice at all points in how to respond to a situation. Well, now the game has changed because you're not letting circumstances control you. You're controlling your reaction to the circumstance. And so mental fitness at its core is this ability to manage your thoughts, feelings, and emotions under pressure. And so I want to offer this to you because again, it goes to that ability to cultivate a growth mindset. Remember the key objectives that we had at the top and reframing stress management. Because when we approach stress management or when we experience some form of stress, we want to we want to start to think about how can we actionably start to bring ourselves back to center. Instead of letting the situation take advantage of us and we wear the situation, how do like a cloth or like a jacket, how do we take that off quick? And how do we get in control of our thoughts, feelings, and emotions? I can't speak to this applying across the board, from all heinous types of situations, but I could say that having worked with victims of domestic violence, prosecuted probably upwards of 1,000 cases in the Bronx, having served abroad, having been in extremely high stress situations, how fast I can recover is essential to my performance. And in speaking with high performers across multiple different areas, they tend to agree. And so it starts with understanding what is self-sabotage? How are we getting in our own way? What does that look like? Pardon me 1 second. Where am I not living up to my potential? And what does that mean to live up to my potential anyway? And so self-sabotage manifests in all these different ways. This is one of my favorite slides in the deck because when I learned some of these things, it changed my relationship with the world and with myself in the sense that I realize here's all the different ways that I'm getting in my way. And so if I can become aware of how self-sabotage is getting in my way, well, I could start to take action to help me ensure that I'm not going to get in my own way. And so, what are some of those ways? Well, self-doubt. How many of us doubt ourselves when we show up to go and deliver and do something? Imposter syndrome. How many of us feel like we don't belong in a particular situation? Perfectionism. How many of us feel like every single thing has to be perfect, otherwise it's not worth it? That fear of failure, feeling like if I don't do this, the world's going to fall apart. What about avoidance? How many hard conversations do we not want to have because we're afraid of what may happen? What about procrastination, right? We think that we're being productive by doing all different types of research, but in reality, we just need to start writing the memo or start writing the brief, hanging out with the wrong people. How many of us have hung out with the wrong people in our life? What about fear of commitment? What about committing to someone or something? And my favorite one, I leave it for last, people pleasing. This is me. This is like, I just want to tell people what they want to hear, so they leave me alone. And I've had to work on that. I've had to guide that conversation internally to realize I don't want to get in my own way by telling people what they want to hear. I want to learn how to set boundaries because boundaries create clarity for you and for them. And so understanding the role of self-sabotage in our life helps us manage our stress, helps us manage our well-being because we can create a lot of the sabotage and chaos in our life. So how do we get out of our own way? And how do we start to pave the way? And it starts with identifying these different areas. So I promise you the stress management ecosystem. I'll just give a bit of background. And again, this is because we have so much time together. I'm going to share a bit more than I otherwise usually would. So I appreciate everyone indulging this. I sat down with high performance psychologist Dr. Michael Gervais. If you don't know who he is, this guy is like the one of the founding fathers of high performance from a psychological level, studying in on it more than anyone. And so he's worked with Fortune 500 CEOs, Super Bowl champions, Olympians, you name it, he's worked with them. And so I talked to him on my podcast Inside the Inspired, which is again just a medium for me to have these conversations and just a tool that I totally geek out on. So he introduced this idea of the stress management ecosystem to me. When we look at hardship or stress, and like I said, we tend to look for one-dimensional solutions to multi-dimensional problems. We don't realize that there's actually a spectrum of things that we can leverage to help us manage that stress more effectively. And so maybe going for a walk isn't the right answer when something happens. And maybe it's more about how we can start to be grateful for a situation that happened. Or maybe we need to leverage mindfulness in a moment where stress hits so we could start to cultivate gratitude for a certain thing that's happened. And we'll talk about gratitude in a second, but let's take these things in order. So conversations with people of wisdom. These can be role models, whether you know them or not. Maybe it's an author, maybe it's a podcaster, maybe it's a mentor. The idea is you speak to people ahead of you about things that you do not know or that have some sort form of an expertise in things that you do not know. So this way you can refine your expertise and knowledge and understanding about something that you do not know. And through that, you start to guide the conversation internally more effectively, and you get the outcome that you want sooner than later. And this is important for managing stress because maybe you need a therapist, maybe you need a coach, maybe you need a friend. Whoever that is, understanding that conversation with people of wisdom could be anybody that can help whenever, I heard this once and it always kind of resonated with me. If you have a problem, it's a who, not a how. And so if you think about who can solve that problem, conversations with people of wisdom will get you closer to that outcome. Next, intentional thought and emotional control. I remember when I first came across this idea, I was like, that's allowed. Like, I'm allowed to control my thoughts. I'm allowed to control my emotions. And so that really opened up the conversation for me internally to realize once that's permissible, well, now how do I learn these things? How do I start to take advantage of these things? And so intentional thought control is about this idea of cognitive reframing, meaning if a situation happens, how can I start to take a different perspective around what's actually happening to me or for me, or what this is potentially training me for? And so intentional thought and emotional control, again, you may not be able to control your first thought, but you can definitely control your second, as in your impulse you may not be able to control initially, but your second thought, your second reaction to it is your responsibility. And that discipline of emotion comes down to going out, living life, and having enough experience to understand how you can respond to a situation when it actually happens. So this way, you don't become reactive to what the world wants of you. You start to set the intention from what you want from the world. And so being intentional, right? Setting that conscious objective is extremely important as a skill because that's how you learn how to be a bigger, better, badder version of yourself. Because ultimately, intentional thought and emotional control are your tools for how you go about responding to adversity. When you're in the middle of the hardest case that you've ever had to try, when you're in the middle of an all-nighter working on uh, a transaction, or whatever your particular field of expertise is, having the emotional and effective discipline to guide that internal dialogue when things happen is a choice. And choices are within our control. Mindfulness, we've already touched on mindfulness a few times in this presentation, so I will defer that to the previous aspects so I'm not being too redundant. Movement as well, anything from movement with a friend, movement with a class, movement in the form of lifting weights, running, walking, rowing, whatever you decide. The point is, as humans, if you're in it, you got to move, especially if you're going through it. The last thing on earth that we feel like we want to do is go for a walk or do something difficult like lift weights or some kind of cardio or anything like that. The point is, if you can put yourself in a position to move, know when it's time for gentle movement, know when it's time to put yourself uh, just outside the bounds of your skill set so that you're testing yourself, not like punishing yourself. Movement should not be punishing, movement should be rewarding. Finding that internal alignment for what type of movement resonates with you, what gets you excited, what's something that you can look forward to, that is what you can find and cultivate. And then journaling and gratitude are extremely important. Sometimes maybe you're going through a situation and, you're overanalyzing it, you don't know what to think. You could take out a pen and paper, and then you could realize that the problem doesn't really take up more than half a page, if that, in small print or even in big print. And once you become aware of that, it helps create perspective around how big or small something actually is. And so if you can get your thoughts out, you have more clarity. And with clarity comes speed. And with speed comes results. And with results comes feedback. And with feedback, you can iterate. And when you can iterate, you can improve. And so through journaling and gaining clarity on our thoughts and understanding what you're grateful for, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. because gratitude is connected to beauty. When you're grateful and you're connected to beauty, you start to get creative. And why creativity is important is because we're problem solvers. Creativity helps cultivate problem solving. And so if you're thinking about how to be grateful, well, I'll give you a couple ways. It can be, again, first thing in the morning when instead of checking your phone first thing, you can list out three things in your head or out loud. I'm grateful I'm not sick. I'm grateful I woke up today. I'm grateful the sun is shining, whatever the thing is. And the idea is that you don't name the same three things any day. I'm grateful for my kids. I got two baby girls at home. I'm grateful they're healthy. Those little things start to help you see the beauty in the world. And that helps you set intentions for what you want out of the world. And so finding that gratitude in your life is essential for cultivating your well-being and managing your stress because ultimately when you're faced with hardship and going back to intentional thought and emotional control, you'll be able to reframe a situation favorably for yourself so you can go about things step by step by step. And so journaling and gratitude when it comes to problem solving are incredible tools to leverage for stress management. And then there's one other exercise just because we have the time that I'll offer you when it comes to gratitude is kind of parallels with this idea of how to find one's purpose and passion. I had the opportunity to sit down with 11-time best-selling author Stephen Kotler, and he's the leading authority on flow state. And one of the exercises that he offers is this idea of if you want to figure out your passion or your purpose, you can list out 25 things that if you had a spare weekend, you would study. And it's funny because once you get past 10, you really have to start thinking about what you would study. And once you get all the way to 25, you start to circle the overlaps within those given topics. And he gives the example of, you know, maybe you love football, maybe you love ants, and maybe you love nutrition. Well, maybe you want to create a ant protein for football players, and you start to identify the overlaps within it. And so the point is the same thing can happen with gratitude. If you start to list out 25 things that you're grateful for and you start to connect to that beauty in your life, it will relieve your stress more effectively so you can clear that bandwidth. Because we all only have a finite amount of bandwidth as humans. There's only so much that we can handle when it comes to what we have to do, when it comes to what's on our plate, when it comes to what we have to memorize, and anything. There's only a finite amount of attention that we have as humans. And attention, as I'm sure you've heard or not heard, attention is the new oil. And every single social media company or, big corporation, all these billion-dollar companies, they all want our attention. Everyone is selling something, everyone wants something from you. So your attention is extremely valuable, right? Companies pay billions for your data. So why aren't you leveraging it for your benefit? And so where you decide to put your attention is essential. So becoming aware of this helps you understand how you get to decide how you show up in the world and where you want to put your attention. And so all of this again comes down to this idea of purpose through service. When I didn't know what my purpose was, I just felt like I needed to do things. I wanted to help in some way. And I was able to find my purpose through service. I'm able to go and have conversations about how to help people manage their stress. To date, I've trained over 2,000 lawyers on how to effectively manage their stress and how to mitigate burnout and how to cultivate well-being in their life because I love this stuff. I just love it. I love what it takes to be a better version of me. And so having this conversation lights me up. And so cultivating that sense of service, f- tapping into my purpose, me doing thousands of reps, running thousands of miles, all for causes that I could get behind, it really helped me realize like I love to give. And when I don't know what else to do, you give. You give with your time, you give with your energy, you give with your attention, you give with your money if you can, and you cultivate that sense of self and manage your stress effectively by helping in some way, shape, or form. Because ultimately the question is not, how do I generate more money in my life? The question is, who can I help? And so through service, you find purpose and you can cultivate community. You find more like-minded people. So you stop hanging out with the toxic people in your life and you start finding more like-minded people that show that better side of who you are intrinsically. What you would do even if someone paid you $1 billion not to do it. I'm sure we all have that one thing. And so cultivating and understanding the stress management ecosystem, it's a practice. It's not a destination. So you're never there. And it's not about winning. It's about learning and adapting and challenging yourself to implement this ecosystem of tools. And so my question to you would be like, what would you add? Is there something I'm missing here? Is there something you feel like could benefit you if it was implemented? But the idea is, even if you wouldn't, you have a spectrum of tools. This is not exhaustive that can help you guide that internal conversation to manage your stress effectively. I'm going to do everyone a favor, take a 4-minute break. Um, in case you have any questions or otherwise, if someone needs to grab a drink of water, I'm going to give you a second just to breathe. See you in 3 minutes now.
Well,
All right, and we're back. Okay, so we left off with the stress management ecosystem. Now we're gonna hop on to the next. Charles, I don't know if you could hear me, but we can definitely see you. Don't know if that's intentional or not, but nice to meet you.
no, I've been here. I just faded out a minute. Okay.
All right, let's talk about mental toughness. Okay, mental toughness is psychological strength used to pursue goals, pressure, setbacks, and challenges. Now, why is this important? Mental toughness, again, going along with mental fitness and mental strength is about how fast you can bring yourself back to center. And so cultivating mental toughness is an attribute as a skill is something that you can do on a daily basis. But understanding what it is at its core is key. And so I'm going to offer you a different perspective on mental toughness than maybe you're familiar with. I've had the opportunity to sit down with some incredible individuals. And I say that very humbly because I've been told more times no than I have yes. So I'm very grateful for everyone that gives me the time to help me understand how they have been able to channel and cultivate mental toughness in their life. And so I'm going to offer this to you now. And so mental toughness as a practice is this idea that it's a multifactorial approach. As in, again, I hope one of the main takeaways that you leave with today is that a lot of this stuff around stress management is holistic. It is not one dimensional, almost like a Rubik's Cube or a lockbox that you need to figure out how to unlock. The key is that when you understand these different pillars, you can leverage them and build them into your life. And so, understanding mental toughness at its core comes down to these 8 pillars. And again, this is a practice. This is something that you can do on a daily basis, and you don't have to do it you don't have to do every single one of these every single day. The idea is that you just become aware. And on that note, awareness is that first aspect of mental toughness, meaning cultivating awareness in your life around your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your reaction to things is at the foundation of all personal and professional development. And why that's important is because when you learn about the foundational element of awareness, you can start to build more awareness into your life. And so the second aspect is self-love, or otherwise known as self-compassion. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with the author of a book and leading researcher on self-compassion, Dr. Kristen Neff. And the uh, definition of burnout that I had offered you before around detachment, depersonalization, and cynicism and exhaustion actually come from her. And so self-compassion is this idea to love yourself and have grace with yourself when you're dealing with a hard situation. For me, however relatable or unrelatable it is, standing up in court in front of the people of Bronx County and having to represent them when someone is facing years of their life in prison and a victim is seeking some sense of justice. And I don't know if I'm the right person to handle the job because I'm self-sabotaging in the form of imposter syndrome. Well, that's an opportunity for me to give compassion to myself, have grace with myself, and tell myself that I am doing my best. And so the idea of self-love and self-compassion as an attribute for being able to handle hard things creates space and bandwidth and allows you to process more effectively because of it. So leveraging self-love is a way to cultivate mental toughness. Self-sufficiency, how you rely on yourself when you're going through a difficult experience, is extremely important. Knowing that you can trust yourself, your judgment, and how you go about cultivating self-sufficiency is learning self-sufficient attributes. And so that comes down to discipline. And so discipline, it's not about whether you are or are not disciplined. It is a spectrum of discipline because I'm sure there's certain things that maybe you're not disciplined in, you would argue, but it's really a low level of discipline, not an absolute or a binary yes or no. And that goes back to the self-compassion and self-love because once you can accurately diagnose it, then you can accurately address it and effectively address it. So how do you cultivate more discipline relative to the low level of discipline that you have? Or maybe you're too disciplined in an area and need to back off a bit. And so understanding these different elements of mental toughness, yes, of course, discipline is uh, a core pillar of it, but you can leverage it to your advantage. And cultivating discipline in your life is about figuring out what you have to give up to get the thing that you want. We'll talk about that as a tool to build resilience a little bit later in one of the resilience building frameworks. And then we have grit. Grit, as Angela Duckworth defines it in her book, grit, passion plus perseverance, the ability to cultivate a passion and learn how to persevere through any hardship that you may experience. Gratitude as well is a component of mental toughness. We already talked about gratitude, fortitude, meaning the ability to continue to see something through even when the odds are against you and you feel like you're getting in your own way, and positive self-talk. How are you going to, and this goes back to Dr. Michael Gervais, he says, maybe you want to talk to yourself in the third person. So, I've tried this a couple of times. If I've been in the middle of a difficult situation, instead of me saying, I got this, it's a Jonathan, you got this, like referring to myself in the third person. For some people, it works. He cited studies that where it was beneficial. I personally have not found it as beneficial. I prefer the I got this. But at the same time, learning that language with yourself is really the main takeaway here. How are you going to cultivate self-compassion through positive self-talk? How are you going to change that relationship with yourself in moments of, oh, I'm such an idiot? That's negative self-talk. That is self-sabotage. That is getting in your own way. And there is no room for that. That is not what a mentally tough person does. That is not what someone who loves themselves does. That is not someone who is self-aware. That's not how they operate. That is not a grateful approach. That is not a fortuitous approach. It is about having that discipline and learning how to rely on yourself to cultivate a positive sense of self, to hone your well-being, to manage your stress, not to call yourself an idiot, even if you think someone else would, because the idea is someone else would not. And if they would, then they're toxic and they're not the right person for you. And that's another form of self-sabotage. So I can do this all day. The point is, you become aware of what it takes to become mentally tough by redefining that toughness and understanding it as a practice, not as a destination. I want to redefine resilience for you before we get into the resilience building frameworks. Resilience, I learned this definition in a book called The Art of Resilience by Stoic sports scholar Ross Edgley. Ross has done things like swim around Great Britain for 6 months without ever setting foot on land. He lived on a boat 6 hours on, 6 hours off. And in his book, The Art of Resilience, he cites this definition of suffering strategically managed. The idea is that you learn how to, instead of trying to live a week in a day, you start to take things step by step by step. Meaning, instead of writing the whole memo all at once, or trying the whole case in one cross-examination, or getting the transaction done in one session, you handle it piece by piece by piece. That first email, that first memo, that first question, whatever the thing is, you learn how to go about things step by step by step by step. How can you strategically manage your suffering? How can you slow things down and break them down into micro steps instead of trying to do the whole thing all at once? It's strategic. Now, I have a very, how do I say this? Counterintuitive approach to suffering. And I am not putting this on anybody. But I'm a firm believer in it being extremely beneficial in the sense when curated and strategically designed into your life, it can help you build resilience because resilience is something that you learn, not just that happens to you by nature of life. That is a subcategory of it. But when you deliberately build hard things into your life just outside the bounds of your skill set, for me, it's been marathon running. For you, it might be pottery, whatever the thing is. You just have to go and figure out what that is. The point is, you want to build hard things into your life so when real hard things happen, you're ready. Because ultimately, how you go about responding to life, that second thought, that resilience that we're talking about here, it's going to help you manage your burnout. It's going to help you when your adversary comes at you. You're going to be able to overcome imposter syndrome. You'll get through stress and mental health challenges. You'll have an easier time making decisions when the pressure's on. You'll be able to overcome self-sabotage where you're getting in your own way. You'll have an easier time maintaining your mental health. You'll improve the quality of your performance in life. Life won't feel as emotionally laborious, and you'll be able to adapt to change more effectively. And a lot of us fear change, but change gets you closer to who you're supposed to be. And that adaptability is about never breaking. You can you don't have to break. That's not the idea. That's not what adaptability is. It's not making sure that you never break. Adaptability is about being this amorphous, malleable, bendable type of person that can adjust to the circumstances. Because here's the thing about peak performance versus optimal performance. I sat down with former Navy SEAL commander and author Rich DeVinny, who wrote a book called The Attributes. And, I was thinking about it on the drive over to work this morning. And, with peak performance versus optimal performance, when you're in the Navy SEALs, it's not about peak performance. It's not about how you can optimize every single second of every single day and have the perfect morning routine and never get tired. It's none of that. You maybe peak once or twice a year, if that. And what are you going to save that peak performance for? Is it going to be that trial, that conversation, whatever the thing is? How are you going to make sure that you peak? What can you do to help optimize in the meantime? Optimal performance is about making the most of the situation based on the current circumstances that you're facing. That's how the Navy SEALs do it. That's how high performers do it. It's about making the most of what you have, not trying to be perfect. And so ultimately, when we talk about resilience protocols, we kind of touched on this before, and I'm just reiterating it here. Cultivating awareness, developing perspective goes back to that cognitive reframing. Values, I'll touch on that in a second. Presence, we've touched on. Control, what you can, paying attention to what you can versus can't control. And mental toughness, we also touched on. These are foundational aspects of resilience. I'm going to talk about values real quick because I think it's extremely important for people to understand conceptually before we get into the actionable elements of the presentation that I'll leave you with. The idea is that when you understand your value, you can add value to anyone or to anything. But what you do, I sat down with human behavior specialist Dr. John DeMartini, author of over 40 books, really fantastic individual. Claims to have read over 40,000, which is crazy, but that's another conversation. He says values are not what you say, values are what you do. And so, for example, if you say that you stand for wealth, but you're never saving any money or investing, maybe you don't stand for wealth. If you say that you stand for family, but you're always on your phone and distracted whenever you're with your family, well, maybe you don't stand for family as much as you think you do. If you say that you stand for health, but you're never really taking care of yourself, well, maybe health isn't really a value for you as much as you think it is. So how can you audit your behaviors in a way that help you become aware of what you actually stand for so you can start to lean in to those values? Maybe you want to say something high level and superficial like integrity. Ultimately, your values are about your actions. So if you're someone who has integrity, how does that person behave? How does that person hold himself out in the world? And so values are important to understand because the more you understand it about yourself, the more effective you'll understand your strengths and the more awareness you will have. So you can make sure that you find jobs or hang out with people that have those same values. Whatever takes up 80% of your week, you can align intrinsically with who you are. So this way, you feel less stress because you're doing more things that operate within your values and alignment. One of my friends, mentors, colleagues, Jordana Confino, she's also an incredible leading expert in the lawyer well-being space, and she has an awesome values assessment um, that I highly recommend that you check out if you haven't already. So if you don't know your values, that's a great place to start. Take a values assessment. Resilience in the legal profession. We've touched on it a few times, but I'm offering you a few more ideas over here. This is what it looks like in practice. How you implement gratitude mindfulness, how you cultivate emotional intelligence, meaning how you read situations, how you reframe certain challenges, how you hang out with the right people, how you cultivate that sense of purpose by giving in some way, shape, or form. You're constantly learning, constantly seeking to be a higher version of yourself, implementing active recovery into your life based on what we talked about when it comes to the stress management ecosystem, seeking out the right mentors and coaches, setting boundaries in your life, being consistent, and then also graduated pressure. This is the idea of if you don't know how to handle a certain situation, regress it. So this way you can slowly progress into handling the actual situation, right? Like I learned how to try cases on misdemeanors before going to felonies. And so the idea is that from handling graduated pressure and understanding graduated pressure, you can cultivate resilience into your life. reflection is an incredible tool to cultivate resilience because you actively go through it's like uh, the word's escaping me, an after action review that they do in the military to understand what went right, what went wrong, what could we have done better. That active reflection helps you process how an experience, how you went through an experience so you can recover and perform better. And then becoming process driven instead of chasing outcomes, you fall in love with the process oriented approach, meaning you love the work, you love the grind of it. That's a little bit too cliche, and I apologize for saying that. But the idea is that when you fall in love with the process, you learn how to cultivate a higher sense of purpose and a higher sense of self because you're not focused on the outcome, you're focused on the moments that you're becoming the person. I remember when I was studying for the bar, I used to say, like, the bar is just a formality. It is this process that actually makes me the lawyer, the process of sitting down and studying. And it's the same thing with marathon running. I'm already a marathoner, but it is the process of training for that marathon that makes me the marathoner, not the fact that I went out there and ran 26.2. And that metaphor, the idea is that by becoming process oriented, you realize that once you achieve certain accolades and they're still not fulfilling, you see it across all sports, you see it across all wealth in some way, shape, or form, that people feel a sense of emptiness because in all actuality, the goals that we set were too low. It was just a gold medal. It was just to go to Harvard. It was just to win something extrinsic. When in reality, it's the intrinsic aspects that help us cultivate resilience. And that leads me into the resilience tools. We already talked about self-compassion and reframing. I'll touch on pattern recognition and interruption. Values alignment, we also discussed. Intrinsic motivation is this idea that you find things that and hobbies, activities, engagements that align with your values that, again, you would do if someone paid you $1 billion not to do it. Like, what is that thing that intrinsically motivates you? I'd run hundreds of miles if no one ever knew. I would be with my kids if no one ever knew. The idea is that you're not operating for the extrinsic accolades, like the medals, the awards, the titles. And instead, you're operating from a place of, I will do these things because they mean something to me. And so the endurance aspect of my career, I share because I won one award for it, but I didn't know I was going to win it. I raised $20,000 doing over 1,000 pull-ups in 4 hours for children who struggle with special needs, learning real life skills, how to integrate into society. But like, I just was going to do the challenge anyway, even if no one knew it. And I happened to get recognized for it after the fact. But the point is, like, I'm not, when I ran like 50 plus miles, I didn't win an award for it. I didn't expect to be standing up in front of 2,000 people over the course of the year talking about it. The idea is that, and I shared these things humbly because I didn't do it for the award or the bragging rights. I did it to figure out who I am and what does it take to reach my potential. And I don't want to leave this life with anything on the table. I want to make sure that I've tapped every single ounce of who I am without anything other than my best foot forward. And so that's what intrinsically motivates me. How are you going to figure out what intrinsically motivates you? Well, we talked about purpose through service. We talked about the stress management ecosystem, the journaling, the gratitude, all these different things. They help you align your values. And then, of course, we talked about recovery, also pattern recognition and pattern interruption. Pattern recognition and interruption are very interesting concepts, but the idea is that you identify certain patterns in your life. I'll give the example of, I walk into my mom's house. And instead of going to give her a kiss, I go to the fridge and I like, hey, what can I eat? What can I snack on? And that's a pattern. So how do I interrupt that pattern? Well, maybe I give my mom a kiss before I go into the fridge. And now I become aware of a pattern in my life and how I can interrupt that pattern to curate a new behavior and deliberately design that in. So where are the patterns in your life that you can interrupt to start to take a different approach? I have a separate presentation called Beyond Burnout where I go deeper into pattern recognition and interruption. If you have any questions about that, I'm happy to go deeper. In the time that we have left, let's talk about resilience frameworks. I have a few outlined here. I might touch on a bit more because I unhit a few slides based on the duration of this presentation. I want to leave some time for questions if there are any. I know we have a very bright audience that probably knows all of this information anyway, but nonetheless, I appreciate you indulging me as long as you have on these topics. on your professionalism day. So let's get into the resilience frameworks. First, we have the straight line method. Now, what does this mean? A straight line method is about honing in on what's called a desire problem. How do you get to the core of what you want? Well, anytime that you've achieved anything in your life, what you've wanted has aligned with what you said you wanted, and then you did what you said that you wanted to do. If you're not doing what you say you want to do, then you could see the straight line is no longer straight. It's out of alignment. And so, in order to achieve anything that you want and get to the root cause of it, what you want has to align with what you say you want, and it has to align with what you do with you want. I'll give the example of, let's say you have a 6 a.m. flight to catch. You'll wake up at 3 a.m. to make sure that you don't miss it. The desire is there. Let's say you have a 6 a.m. thing you don't want to do, like a 6 a.m. workout. Well, you might hit snooze, but you were willing to make the flight to the Bahamas for vacation. What changed? It's the desire. So how do you tap in to the desires on a daily basis that will allow you to optimize you to be at the right frequency to achieve the things that you inherently and intrinsically want to achieve? That is the straight line method. Want, say, do. This is called the passenger seat exercise. This idea is rooted in a concept called inner child work, meaning uh, there's this idea in a book called The Body Keeps a Score, written by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, where I was introduced to the concept while I was working as a criminal prosecutor in Bronx County. And when I learned about uh, trauma as a lack of presence, and when I learned about how to heal a younger version of myself, by understanding that I could talk to a younger version of myself, I started to engage in this idea of inner child work, where you effectively get to know yourself by healing a younger version of you. So, what does that look like actionably? Well, imagine you're in a car or on a couch with a younger version of yourself. For me, it's the 15 or 17-year-old version of myself. Well, what questions would you ask him or her? And do you think that person would be proud of you today? And so having that conversation with a younger version of yourself helps you understand those desires, like we were talking about earlier, that desire to be liked, that desire to be needed, that desire to want to achieve, because there was some sense of a lack. Whatever the thing is, what is it that inherently can help you understand who that younger version of yourself is so you could better understand who you are today? The passenger seat exercise for me, when I'm talking to like the 15 or 17-year-old version of myself, is like, well, why'd you make those decisions at 15 years old, man? Like, why did you feel like you had to say that thing to that person? Why did you feel like you had to, you know, make that thing up about, that test score, whatever the thing is. Again, that people pleasing, whatever it was for me. And so understanding the passenger seat exercise and inner child work as an exercise that I could leverage to help heal that version, to help understand my motivations and desires, allowed me to effectively guide that internal dialogue so I can make peace with that younger version of me and move on to and step into a vision of who I am today. The 10-year future version of you, for every guest that comes on my podcast, I always pose this question to them, and now I'm going to pose it to you. If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think they would say to you? Now, in all the answers that I got to this question, you can imagine it's ranged the gamut from everything to stay with it, to bet on yourself, to trust your instinct. And one individual said that they would ask themselves a question. And the question was, are you making a difference? Earlier in the year, I was reading Elon Musk's biopic, and he talks by Walter Isaacson, and he talks about how Elon went through this midlife crisis at, I think it was like 14 years old. And it's a joke because, 14-year-old midlife crisis. He went through this crisis at 14 years old. And his whole thing was like, what am I doing here? Like, what's my life's purpose? I don't get it. And so he was reading A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and he noticed that the computer in the book, when asked uh, about the purpose of life, would answer 42. And he realized in that moment it's not about the answers, it's about the quality of the questions. And so maybe it's not so much what the future version of you would tell you to do in order to get to where your ideal dream outcome is. Instead, it's about what questions would that individual ask you in order to get there. And so if you don't know what questions to ask yourself, I mean, there's plenty of language models out there that you could figure out better questions to ask to get better answers. But the point is, having yourself as a guide to trust yourself to get to that next step is a tool that even comes from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, the mental board of advisors. And you could have all these different types of role models in your life, but maybe you should start looking up to yourself also. Because as much as I've talked about conversations with people of wisdom, trust your own intuition. Trust your own level of discernment. So this way you can take responsibility and uphold that decision making, good, bad, or indifferent, learn to live with the outcomes. But ideally, your decision making process becomes about your values and it becomes about what that future version of you would say to you in a moment where you feel like you need that guidance. Mental aid stations is this idea of active recovery. I love this exercise because it helps me realize again what intuitively matters to me. So, what you would do for this is list out all the things you would do on your perfect day, and then you circle how many of those things you can do on a daily basis. For me, it is a great cup of coffee. You can see it here, but a ceramic cup. Why? Because when I'm taking a plastic cup, I'm on the go. And if I'm on the go, I'm not present. I'm just like on to the next, on to the next. And there's plenty of times in my life where that's a thing. But the ceramic cup reminds me to slow down. It reminds me to be present. And so it's a mental aid station for me on a daily basis to be where my feet are, to slow down, to be engaged in the moment. So this way I can live out my kind of perfect day. But I would offer you, what's your perfect day look like? Maybe it's a walk with someone you love. Maybe it's a conversation with someone you care about. Maybe it's a movie that you enjoy. Maybe it's that meal. Whatever the thing is, those mental aid stations are active recovery stations that you can leverage, just like when you're running a race, you can, the metaphorical race of life, and they have those aid stations. You stop over, you get some water, and you keep going on to the next. Even if you don't run, you get the metaphor. I appreciate you bearing with me because I can't think of another one. But the idea is that you're actively recovering to build these things in, by building these things into your day, you're actively recovering. So instead of feeling drained at the end of the day, you actually have something that you can look forward to that helps you manage your stress so you can more effectively recover again that mental strength, how fast you can bounce back. So that is the mental aid station framework. And then the Be Like Mike. If any of you saw The Last Dance, or if we have any basketball fans, the Be Like Mike framework comes from the interview with Michael Jordan, where he says, I took that personally. Meaning, if for some context, Michael Jordan would get insulted by pretty much anything or invent insults that people would say just to rile himself up to perform at a high level. So the idea of the Be Like Mike framework is to learn how to channel raw emotions into productive energy. So if you're facing some sense of anger, how can you channel that anger into power? If you're channeling some form of stress or nerves, how do you channel that into activation energy and excitement? If you're facing some type of raw emotion, how do you leverage it to your advantage? And so, again, going back to that cognitive reframing, how can I make this emotion work for me? How can I guide this emotion to its proper place? And if you don't know the different types of emotions that you can potentially experience, there's a great tool that you can research called the map of consciousness that ranges the spectrum of emotions from shame all the way up to enlightenment. And so I would offer you to Google that. I don't have it here because it's not mine, but I can point in the reference materials to it. The goal is when you understand the spectrum of emotions and the associated feelings that go along with it, you can start to recognize those emotions to cultivate awareness, consciousness, intention, the themes that we're touching on, to help manage your stress more effectively. So I'd encourage you to be like Mike. And then the naming sacrifices framework, when we talked about discipline and the associated ideas, naming sacrifices is about understanding what you're going to have to give up to get the thing that you want. Now, the idea is if you're going to implement this exercise, you would do this before you go after whatever your said goal is. Meaning, if you want to be an incredible trial attorney and it's going to take 20 hours a day, you're going to have to sacrifice sleep, time with people you love, and the like. Is that a sacrifice that you're willing to make? You have to know what game you're playing and know what you're optimizing for. The naming sacrifices framework helps guide that conversation because maybe you don't want the thing as bad as you think you do. And so, how can you be proactive within that specific aspect of identifying the potential obstacles? Not just, oh, this is out of my reach. It's what do I have to give up to get that thing? Maybe I don't want to wake up at 6 a.m. to go to the gym. Maybe I don't want to give up that quality time with my loved one. Having that in order to be the best, in order to make partner, whatever the thing is, naming those sacrifices are going to help you get clarity. Because again, with clarity comes speed, with speed comes results, with results comes feedback, with feedback comes iteration, iteration comes improvement. So that's the naming sacrifices framework. And then the last framework that I'll leave you with is the evidence frame. This is a great tool for overcoming imposter syndrome. And I just published a piece on this with Law 360 that should be coming out in November. The idea is that you list all of the things that give you credibility in your chosen field in a moment where you feel like you're getting in your own way. So, for example, me standing up in court in Bronx County, I feel like I'm not worthy of the moment. I'm going to start to make a list of all the things that prepared me for that moment. My supervisors trust me. I interviewed the witnesses. I prepared the cross-examination. I went through the opening 1,000 times. Whatever the things are that give me credibility to stand up and meet that moment. And then I have to ask myself the question, am I being unreasonable based on this evidence? And two things will happen. One of two things will happen. Either you realize you're wasting too much bandwidth worrying about this thing, or you realize where there are gaps for you to potentially go and take action to cure those gaps. So either way, it's no longer about the imposter syndrome, it's about the action. And so how can you act in the sense of I'm done ruminating, I'm going to go deliver and meet that moment, or here's where I have to improve, this is where I'm going to go cure the gaps. That is the evidence frame. And so I'll leave you with this. The best sides of who you are exist on the other side of the hardest things that you've ever done. If you can deliberately build hard things into your life, you will have an easier time dealing with hardship as it approaches. I really do appreciate the time that you have spent with me here today. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer it. Once again, my name is Jonathan Cohen, and this was The Art of Overcoming Setbacks.
Jonathan, thank you so much. And I'm going to give everybody their program code right now. And it's PROF13. PROF13. And also it will be in the group chat. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Prophet.
So if there are no questions, I'm happy to wrap it up.
Anybody have questions? Let me see.
Yeah, you said you worked for NVIDIA at the beginning of the meeting.
No, I work for PMY Technologies, 20 plus year partner of NVIDIA.
Anybody else have questions? No? All right, great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. We appreciate
you,
your
everyone.
time. Thank you. Everybody have a great day.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take